Can you get all the essential nutrients on a carnivore diet? Find out here today on Jimmy Rants. Click on that little box down there in the corner. It'll take you straight to IGTV for today's episode. JimmyRants.com is the website, and as always, you can engage live in the content right here on Instagram. You got to go follow me. I am at Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live, just like all these wonderful people coming in here, Austin and Sharon and Adnan and so many more coming in right now here today on Jimmy Rants. We do go live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, so be there, be square. We also simulcast over here on my Facebook page, so thank you guys for being here today. We also simulcast on my YouTube live stream. Yes, we have lots of eyeballs here today, all watching live on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live, you can watch it on replay in a variety of ways. First, here on Instagram, we do put all the past episodes up over on IGTV, so check it out. We also put the past episodes up over on YouTube. If you type in a keyword Jimmy Rants, you will find the show. By the way, today, another Jimmy Rants bonus episode over on YouTube, youtube.com/livinglowcarbman. I have this guy named Rob Frankfurt. So Rob is an investor, an entrepreneurial investor who changed his life with a low-carb diet. And so he has this pool of money that he's invited various investors to feed into, and then he uses that to go seek out companies to invest in that are making products and services and devices, especially the technology devices. Things like the Oura Ring is one of his investments. And he's investing in these companies to help get them off the ground to make these kind of tests more accessible. So go watch that right now. It's over on, well, don't watch it right now. I want you to watch me live right now. But when this is over, go check it out over on YouTube. It is a Jimmy Rants bonus episode over on YouTube. Rob Frankfurt, and it also airs on the Real Talk podcast here today, LLDLC.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And then finally, pop on over to the official website. It is JimmyRants.com. And once you're there, you can see all the past episodes there. And then you can support my work either as a Patreon or through PayPal. Really, any donation of any amount would be greatly appreciated. Okay, you guys, I wanted to talk about a topic here today that I don't think gets enough play, especially with the popularity of the diet I'm going to talk about. And I see a lot of people on the various formats I know are on this particular diet. I see my friend Kelly Hogan just popped in on the Instagram feed. And Kelly, you know all this stuff, but it's going to be exciting to educate people that yes, you can get all of the essential nutrients that you need for your body from the carnivore diet. Yes, that all-meat diet is enough. And of course, people kind of are incredulous to that. Well, where do you get your vitamin C from if you don't have fruits that have vitamin C? There's plenty of vitamin C in animal foods. Well, you can't possibly live your whole life without consuming fiber. We all know fiber is so essential. No, it's not. In fact, no carbohydrate is essential at all, which is why you get all the nutrients and all the essential nutrients that you need on the carnivore diet. And I could go on and on down the list, but I have a brand new paper. And this is a good friend of mine. Her name is Amber O'Hearn. If you don't know Amber's story, she was sick with a bunch of different autoimmune diseases and different conditions, and she was a mess. And this was over a decade ago. And I know Kelly has been on the carnivore diet for over a decade as well. So Amber has been doing this a very long time, and she went meat-based, not plant-based, meat-based, and totally helped her health. And so she's been one of the champions. Long before there was a keto diet community, she and Kelly and different people, they already were this community, and now everybody else is kind of jumping on their bandwagon. Well, Kelly got a paper published in a journal. This is huge, guys. She's not a scientist. She's simply a lay person who's extremely educated about the science regarding the carnivore diet. And so this was published, literally just got published. I asked her to send me a copy of it when I saw it there, and it was behind a firewall. So I said, can I have the whole paper so I can do a Jimmy Rants on this? And so she sent this to me. It was published in the journal Current Opinions, Endocrinology, Diabetes, Obesity. That's the name of the journal. And it literally hot off the presses. And the title of the paper, which I'm about to read to you, it's a pretty short paper by comparison to most studies. Can a carnivore diet provide all essential nutrients? By Amber O'Hearn. And this is a question that a lot of people will probably bring to you. Maybe you're one of the people that has decided to turn to all meat, all animal foods, and then you're starting to have friends, family, and busybodies question you about that. Well, what about this nutrient? What about that nutrient? So Amber has heard this many times over in her life. So she decided to write a whole paper about it. So let's get into it. The purpose of the review, the aim of this study was to summarize the current contributions affecting knowledge and predictions about the nutritional adequacy of a plant-free diet. I love they call a carnivore diet a plant-free diet, because a lot of times the plant-based community will call theirs a meat-free diet or a meatless Mondays, and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of interesting terminology. And so she gives historical accounts to prove her point. Recent findings, as demonstrated in recent experience, nutrient interactions, and metabolic effects of ketogenic diets can impact your nutritional needs, sometimes resulting in nutrient-sparing effects. Here's the thing, too, that's never talked about within the context of nutrients. When you shift your body over from eating kind of a crappy carbon sad diet over to mostly being fueled by fat and ketones, your nutrient needs change. Like, think about it. Why would they not? A lot of the nutrients in the foods you were eating before on a crap diet, you weren't getting very many. And so why are we suddenly worried about a carnivore diet, for example, or a ketogenic diet, for example, not being full of nutrients, when most Americans walking around taking the standard American diet and eating it every day, nobody worries about their nutrient deficiencies and whether they're getting all their nutrients or not. Other studies highlight conflicting hypotheses about the expected effect on metabolic acidosis and therefore mineral status of adding alkaline mineral-rich vegetables. So the whole pH balance also comes into play. So the summary, and again, if you're just joining us, I am reading from a brand new paper. This is published in a journal, Current Opinions in Endocrinology, Diabetes, and Obesity. This is written by a member of the carnivore community, longtime member, Amber O'Hearn. She's been eating carnivore since Jesus walked the earth. Yes, I mean, it's been a long time that she's been on the carnivore diet. So she knows from whence she speaks. So the summary, a carnivore diet is a newly popular but as yet sparsely studied form of the ketogenic diet. Plant foods are completely eliminated, such that all or almost all nutrition derives just from animal-sourced foods. Ketogenic diets are already nutritionally controversial due to their near complete absence of carbohydrate and their high dietary fat content, but most keto diet advocates emphasize the inclusion of plant foods. In this review, we discuss the implication of relying solely on animal-based foods in terms of essential nutrient status. So maybe you've been tempted to try the carnivore diet, but you were afraid to because you thought it was deficient in various nutrients. Well, I have to eat the plant matter because that plant matter has some nutrient in it that I can't get from an animal food only diet. Amber is about to lay the case out that, yeah, you can. You can get all of the essential nutrients that you need. Introduction. A carnivore diet is based on animal-sourced foods, drawing no significant contribution from plants. Plant elimination is considered a key to the immunological benefits imputed to the diet, which is often promoted as effective against autoimmune conditions. So remember, Amber's history is she had a plethora of autoimmune conditions that got better once she went to an all meat diet. I recently had on the Living La Vida Low Carb show Rebecca Farmer, Tailored Keto Health here on Instagram, and she had over 10 autoimmune conditions, 20 plus conditions overall, and she went animal based and she was able to heal all of those ailments, including Lyme disease. She had a bunch of stuff. Go listen to that episode. You can also watch it on previous on YouTube. But man, like, so many people are seeing a complete turnaround of their risk for autoimmune disease simply by consuming no plants in their diet. This has been attributed to the exclusion of something called Xenobiotic secondary metabolites. So basically, you're changing the gut microbiome, and this is another kind of thing that is put out there as an antithesis to the carnivore diet is, well, you'll mess up your gut microbiome. Well, the question becomes, okay, are you messing it up, or are you simply shifting it over now that your body is primarily being fed with meat and animal foods? Do you need the same gut diversity that you had when you were eating a mixed diet? All kinds of plants and vegetables and meat and everything. And the argument could be made, no, you don't. So that's what she's getting at here. Because animal source foods are largely devoid of carbohydrate and they're relatively high in fat if they're in their natural form, carnivore diets are typically ketogenic as a side effect. Sometimes people can go a little bit heavy on the protein on a carnivore diet, and it can make it non-ketogenic. I remember Dr. Sean Baker was on one of my podcasts early last year, and he made the point that his entire purpose is not to be in a ketogenic state, and when he has tested for ketones, he's not producing ketones. Well, that could be for one of two reasons. He's either very well keto adapted so that you don't show ketone production anymore, or he's eating an excessive amount of protein, which could kick you down out of ketosis. And again, if your goal is ketosis, then minimizing carbohydrate is definitely the first step, but making sure you get adequate amounts of the natural fats that come with that meat and other animal foods is the second step in it. In other words, chicken breast is not necessarily a great option if you're trying to be ketogenic and carnivore. The degree of ketogenesis on a carnivore diet varies mostly with the amount of protein, which is what I was just saying. Some varieties of the carnivore diet, such as the Paleolithic Ketogenic Diet, PKD, explicitly require highly ketogenic macronutrient ratios, which means low protein and higher fat. Whether a diet is considered ketogenic depends on whether it causes sufficient ketogenesis such that blood ketone bodies rise above a clinically defined threshold, which is typically 0.5 millimoles per liter. As such, its definition is agnostic about dietary qualities, including the nutritional completeness, and so for this reason, researchers often emphasize the importance of ketogenic diets being well formulated. And she says all that just to say that there's a bad way to do keto and there's good ways to do keto. And carnivore, almost by default, if you choose foods that are in their natural whole form, almost by default becomes that well-formulated ketogenic diet. And so, again, she's laying the basis. And if you're just joining us, there's a new paper that's published just this week in the journal Current Opinions of Endocrinology, Diabetes, and Obesity. And it's by Amber O'Hearn, a longtime carnivore diet advocate. And she's laying the case that you can get all the essential nutrients that you need for your body just from a carnivore diet. Encouraging the inclusion of low-starch vegetables in ketogenic diets has been used as a point of agreement that would bridge otherwise clashing nutritional paradigms because they're compatible with ketogenesis and because there is a perceived consensus that vegetables and other plant matter have health benefits. Have you ever stopped to think about that? The reason why ketogenic diets, yes, they're still heavily vilified, they're still heavily opposed, but if you include plants, oh, well, that makes them great. And my friend Dr. Will Cole wrote a book called Ketotarian, which was a, quote, mostly plant-based diet. So he does mostly plants, and then there's eggs and fish for the most part. And of course, it has been heralded, oh, this is a better way to do keto. No, it's not a better way. It's just another way. But the reason they think it's a better way is because it includes the plant-based food, which Amber is saying there's this perception that there's a consensus that, oh, everybody agrees plant foods are wonderful. Well, no, not everybody does agree with that. We argue here that although plants can certainly be used as a source of some essential nutrients and can help with compliance by giving you variety and pleasure, a well-formulated ketogenic diet need not contain them in order to be nutritionally adequate. And you just made, or I just made all the plant-based people's minds explode, because that's their whole point. Well, you need to get all the fruits and vegetables because that's where all the nutrients and vitamins and minerals and everything you could ever need are found. And Amber is about to put a big old bomb right in the middle of that hypothesis, because it's not true. Historical data, biochemistry, and physiology have to be considered. Most essential nutrients are found in abundance in animal source foods. A cursory examination of food nutrient databases, such as the ones provided by the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, shows that technically speaking, there are no essential nutrients that cannot be found, at least in some quantity, in animal source foods. Indeed, most are more available from animal sources, and she gives some examples. So in macadamia nuts, you look at thiamine, 1.2 milligrams, but pork loin has 0.6 milligrams. Riboflavin, raw spinach has 0.2 milligrams of riboflavin, but beef liver has 3.4 milligrams. Green peas have niacin, 2.1 milligrams. Beef liver has 17.5 milligrams. B6 is in a potato, 0.3, but in beef liver, 1.0. Iron, raw spinach has 2.7 milligrams. Beef liver has 6.5. I could go on and on. Zinc, green peas, 1.2. Oysters, 16.6 milligrams. Vitamin C, which everybody thinks you have to eat lots and lots of citrus fruits like oranges. They do have a boatload of vitamin C, but you get a lot of vitamin C in things like beef tongue and other sources of animal foods. So this whole notion that you need to load up on fruits and vegetables is just not true. This is intuitive in part because animals are made up of the components they require, and humans are similar to animals. We eat that there is no major divergence between the needs and the composition. Nonetheless, some nutrients are more common than others, or they are distributed to more commonly eaten parts than others. Further, the rate of use of a given nutrient is not necessarily proportional to its ongoing level in the body. That's true. Moreover, it would be a mistake to automatically assume that all nutrients are efficiently extractable from a given source. This is so true, guys. All those plant-based people who say, well, I get all the essential nutrients I need from my low-fat vegan diet. There are raw vegans out there who don't eat any fat at all. Well, what do they do about vitamins A, D, E, and K? A, D, E, and K are the fat-soluble vitamins. So you can have all the vitamin A, all the vitamin D, all the vitamin E, and all the vitamin K in those plant-based foods that you're eating, and yet if you don't have fat in your diet as well, you're not absorbing those nutrients. Do you see what I'm talking about? It's not just the quantity. This is what Amber's making in her point here. It's not just the quantity of the vitamin content of the food you eat. It's your body's ability to convert those and use those appropriately. And here's the thing, what the point she was making about how the human body is very similar to the animal body. When you consume that animal-based food, Your body recognizes it a lot more readily than it does from plant-based food, which it's not related to, but it's very closely related to animal foods. And so when you consume an animal food, all of the components of that animal food, your body's like, oh, we know what that is. Send it there, send it there, send it there, send it there, send it, store it here, store it there. And it knows what to do with it. And it's this rush to be able to use the information that you get from that food that you eat, and it's more readily accessible, that makes animal foods far more superior than to any plant-based food. Absorption, extraction, and interconversion of nutrients depend on anatomy and physiology, which is what we were just talking about. Generally speaking, for humans, most required nutrients are more available and more bioavailable from animal-sourced foods than they are from plant sources. Two notable exceptions that we will consider in depth are calcium and vitamin C. Whether it is possible to obtain adequate levels of all nutrients without extraordinary measures is a contentious one, even within online communities promoting carnivore diets, in part because nutrient requirements are context dependent. In other words, you can't just say you need this amount of this without kind of the context of someone and whatever their situation is. Nutrient requirements depend on that context. As the recent discovery of vitamins last century, intensive initiatives have helped determine human nutrient needs across a variety of conditions. Guidelines in the form of daily intake references are designed probabilistically. That is, for an individual, meeting a recommended intake will ensure that the chances of inadequacy are very small. In other words, the RDA, what you're shooting for with these goals, with these various micronutrients, it's simply as the minimum, the starting point. Now, yes, you can go excess in some of these areas, but for the most part, most people aren't even getting the bare minimum. And so all of these RDAs are like bare minimum, which is what she's talking about here. So as such, they are necessarily overestimating for the average consumer. And they're also not taking into account that those RDAs also are for the people that have to have these nutrients in their body because of the junk diet that they're eating. Okay? And yes, somebody over on YouTube said the role of genetics also plays a big role. Yes, certain people will need more nutrients for this and that and everything in between. So those things aren't put into consideration when you have these mass recommendations for vitamins. This is particularly desirable when designing a diet to be administered to many people because there is little cost incurred by some people getting more than necessary for the benefit of ensuring that everyone gets enough. In other words, they're doing this in general terms. This is why I believe, you guys, that as we move forward in the nutritional health world, we're going to move far away from these like blanket, this is what you do kind of statements, to more of a very, very individualized, bio-individual, specifically tailored just for you kind of approach. And it's going to be based on biomarkers of measuring like your nutrients in your body, what your sufficiency levels are, what your insufficiency levels are, and then tailoring kind of like a customized lab of exactly what you need. Now, I know there's companies out there that do that right now. A lot of functional medicine practitioners do that kind of work, but it's not nearly common enough. Far too many people say, oh, I heard about this ketogenic, this carnivore diet, let me try it. And they don't know what they're doing. And they don't know what they're sufficient in, insufficient in. There's no guidance. They're just eating a bunch of steaks and, oh, I must be doing it. No, not necessarily. It is not possible to determine exact needs for every individual on every occasion. No, not unless you're doing this kind of blood work that we're talking about. A particular individual has no basis for expecting to fall below the higher end of the spectrum and would therefore be prudently advised to act as though he or she requires more than average. However, if the population receiving the recommendation differs systematically from the population on which the recommendations were derived, these recommendations may be significantly in error in a predictable way. So what she's saying is, all of these RDAs of what all these little components of nutrients you need in your diet to be healthy, they're all predicated on people eating a mixed diet. Mixed of meat, plant matter, junk food, processed food, all that. And so that's what they're predicated on. What we don't have are the RDAs for someone who's only eating a meat-based diet. Now, I know Dr. Sean Baker and other people are working on studying the carnivore diet, so they are actively seeking funds. If you want to help crowdsource, support them, meatrx.com, I believe is their website. You can donate to them. But they're looking into this so that we can see what is the normal for all of these things that might run counter to what the normal is in the RDA right now. And it's something you have to remember even for those of you that eat a ketogenic diet. Your recommended daily allowance, your recommended nutrients that you should have in your diet is going to be a far cry from what a mixed diet would be out there in the mainstream with a bunch of junk and a little bit of meat, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's not going to be the same. This is where I think a lot of research needs to go in the near future. If we're going to have a segment of the population who's going to choose to eat healthy, I think we need to know what are the differences. And same, and a little bit of a tangent here, I'm going to get back to Amber's paper, but same thing goes for blood labs. Think about it. When you go to your doctor and they say that you have some marker that he measures that's, quote, out of range, what he means is out of range for that lab. And remember, who's taking these labs? Who's going to these labs? It's sick people. It's people probably mostly eating a standard American diet. And so the lab numbers are based on sick people eating a crappy diet. Well, number one, you're probably not sick and you don't eat a crap diet. So why would those ranges be relevant for you? And the answer is they're not. Same goes for the RDA with all these nutrients. Why would those ranges still be applicable if you're eating a mostly animal food diet? Plant-free diets may thus entail some different rates of use for some nutrients due to nutrient interactions and metabolic effects. And this is something you don't really hear the vegans talk about because they don't want you to know that if you're not eating a whole bunch of plant matter, you actually don't need some of these nutrients that they think are essential. For example, ingestion of fiber can negatively affect the absorption of many vitamins and minerals. Did you know that? When you eat fiber, it actually takes away many vitamins and minerals, which can lower requirements of those nutrients for those not consuming fiber. So in other words, some of that RDA is actually there to make up for the bad effects that come from eating the very diet that you think is healthy. Ironic, huh? So if you're a braggadocious plant-based eater, oh, look at all the vitamins and minerals and everything I get in my diet. Yeah, but the fiber you're eating is sucking a lot of that out, so you're really not getting as much as you think you are. Do you see how compelling this is? Mineral absorption is also impaired in the presence of phytates. Zinc absorption is particularly affected by this. In a document jointly published by the World Health Organization and the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, examining when fortification is warranted, it is estimated that those with diets very high in grains and legumes may be absorbing less than 1/3 as much zinc as those with more typical phytate intake. Again, all these plant-based people don't want you to know that the very foods that they're eating to be healthy are actually the very antithesis of healthy. It can therefore be inferred that those on a diet completely devoid of grains and legumes ought to require significantly less zinc than the average person. Metabolic effects can also take on various forms. It's been proposed that as iodine is primarily used for the thyroid hormone T3, and as ketogenic diets require less T3 for carbohydrate metabolism, the iodine requirement on a low-carb diet may be much lower than that on a high-carb diet. This is why those of you who have thyroid issues and you start to see lower or higher numbers on the various markers on your thyroid panel, and you go ketogenic, you go low carb, you go carnivore, you start to see those levels come down. And sometimes the doctor will even say, oh my gosh, you're going hypothyroid because it's getting too low. But it's not a lower number in and of itself that makes it bad. It's not a lower number that shows any signs of disease. It's actually more better function is what it is when your body doesn't have to work as hard. And it's because of the dietary shift that you make. Similarly, blood levels of the omega-3 fatty acid DHA are elevated on a ketogenic diet. This is thought to be due to reduced conversion to the inflammatory eicosanoids. Such preservation could impact essential fatty acid requirements, which again, you get a lot of the essential fatty acids, especially if you choose quality animal-based foods. You get a lot of those kinds of things in your diet. A second way that metabolism can affect nutrient requirements is when there is contribution from synthesis by the intestinal bacteria, and this bacterial activity changes due to the diet. Folate levels are increased significantly by ketogenic diets and even by intermittent fasting. This is due to increased intestinal microbial production and not intake of it. All right, so let's turn to vitamin C. Vitamin C is an interesting case because despite the fact that meat is a relatively poor source of this nutrient, it has been recognized for centuries that meat has anti-scorbutic properties. The following observations from C. Ralph is in an 1882 issue of the medical journal Lancet discusses this phenomenon. Sir, I was struck by two independent observations which occurred in your columns last week with regard to the etiology of scurvy, and that's generally brought on by low vitamin C levels, both tending to controvert the general received opinion that the exclusive cause of that disease is the prolonged and complete withdrawal of succulent vegetables from the diet. Thus, Mr. Neal of the ERA Arctic Expedition says, I do not think that spirit or lime juice is of much use as an anti-scorbutic. For if you live on the flesh of the country, even I believe without vegetables, you will run very little risk of scurvy. Dr. Lucas writes, in this case of the semi-savage hills of Afghanistan and Baluchistan, their food contains a large amount of meat and is altogether devoid of vegetables. The singular immunity from scurvy of these races has struck me as a remarkable physiological circumstance which should make us pause before accepting the vegetable doctrine as it relates to scurvy. These observations do not stand alone. Arctic voyagers have long pointed out this anti-scurvy property of fresh meat, and Baron Larry, with regard to hot climates, arrived at the same conclusion in the Egyptian expedition under Bonaparte at the end of last century. A candidate explanation for these observations is that many of the symptoms of scurvy are because of a lack of carnitine. There's a lot of carnitine in meat, you guys, which can be derived endogenously using vitamin C, but can also be absorbed in large quantities from the meat you eat in your diet. Given that meat is an excellent source of carnitine, it may be that the carnitine is sparing vitamin C that would otherwise be needed for synthesis, while the small amounts of vitamin C it provides are enough, just enough, to give you all the vitamin C your body needs. Precipitous drops in muscle carnitine have been proposed to explain the early symptoms of scurvy, severe fatigue, and muscle weakness long before tissue lesions from impaired collagen synthesis appear. On the contrary, because carnitine is used for fatty acid oxidation, which is upregulated when you're in the midst of nutritional ketosis, it may be an example of a substance in higher demand in the ketogenic context, meaning that if carnitine itself is not adequately supplied, vitamin C requirements may instead be increased. So this is an argument, you guys, that if you're going to eat a ketogenic diet, you want to lean more towards the higher meat, make it meat-based as the primary source of nutrition rather than plant-based as the primary source of nutrition. So you need to lean closer to the carnivore diet than a ketotarian type of diet if you want this to happen, unless in your ketotarian diet you're consuming other sources of vitamin C, which it's hard to get from things that aren't carby. Even though these kinds of sparing effects are plausible mechanistically, aside from folate, which has been clinically measured, it is impossible to know whether and to what extent they actually occur in practice. Empirical study under this dietary condition is unfortunately sparse. So, empirical evidence. What little evidence exists for the sustainability of plant-free diets comes in three different forms. Reports on Arctic or nomadic societies such as the Inuit or Mongolians or mountain herders, as mentioned in the Lancet study, which we just talked about, clinical case studies, as well as anecdotes. The debates surrounding the degree of inclusion of plants in Arctic and nomadic societies are beyond the scope of this review. However, it is clear that in these environments, plant food sources would be exceedingly rare. Think about it. There's snow everywhere. There's ice on the ground. There's nothing growing. So what is their source of food? Whale blubber, other wild game. These are the things. Anecdotal evidence is also riddled with problems and won't be considered further here. Of the clinical studies, one of the most informative is from early last century, 1928. Two Arctic explorers, the Harvard anthropologist Stefansson, everybody's heard of him, and his co-explorer Anderson agreed to participate in a year-long study of eating only meat after having been challenged about their claims of having excellent health not eating plants. High-protein diets while living with indigenous people while they were in the Arctic. Part of the experiment was conducted in a ward in Bellevue Hospital. Several reports were published on different aspects of the results, including one in which it was specifically noted there was no clinical evidence of any vitamin deficiency. These guys encamped themselves with this group in the Arctic, the indigenous people, and they ate that way for a period of time, just to kind of see how they ate and why they were so healthy. They came back and they reported the findings and nobody believed them. They didn't. And so they're like, okay, even though we just got home, we're going to prove this. Put us in a metabolic ward. And they agreed to this. Lock them up for a year. And literally all they were allowed to eat for an entire year was meat. And at the end of the year, they were completely healthy and no vitamin deficiencies, no problems whatsoever. This is the foundation of why the carnivore diet is so popular today. They proved the efficacy. The only comment related to a potential deficiency pertaining to calcium, because the amount of calcium they ate was reportedly only a quarter of what the average mixed diet would be. More importantly, they appeared to be in a negative calcium balance. According to another study, their blood calcium levels remain stable, but normal blood calcium levels are not necessarily an indication of sufficiency, because bone resorption can be used as a source to keep blood calcium at well-tolerated levels. In other words, there was no leaching of calcium out of the bones. They were maintaining their bone. Maybe blood levels were kind of on the lower side, but if your body needed calcium bad enough, it could pull it from the bones, and it just didn't do that. Moreover, low-carb diets have, at least in one case, been found to decrease calcium balance, which was presumed to be a function of acid load. For this reason, high-calcium, non-starchy vegetables were strongly recommended for inclusion in ketogenic diets. On the other hand, another study measuring the effect of a high-meat diet on calcium flux concluded that increased calcium absorption precisely compensated for increased excretion, leaving no change in the bone resorption. Likewise, as discussed in a recent review of evidence for and against the hypothesis that meat eating causes bone resorption, it has been found that in ketogenic conditions, ketone generation increases or decreases dynamically as a compensatory response to challenge loads of exogenous acid or base. So the point there is, if you're going to eat a carnivore diet, you probably need to be in ketosis. Now, some people might say, well, how can you not be in ketosis? And we talked about this earlier. Over consuming protein, which means you're eating unnatural sources of food, because most natural sources of food that you would eat on a carnivore diet are going to come with their own level of fat that would come with it that would offset the protein effects. If you eat chicken breast is not normal. So don't be surprised if you get hungry and you start having issues because you ate chicken breast. And I don't mean to pick on chicken breast. It's just one of the more blatant examples of a kind of food in our system that people think is healthy simply because it's lower in fat. No, eat the stuff that has the fat with it and you'll be okay. Therefore, attempting to change acid balance through vegetable intake could probably be futile. In fact, it could actually add acidity despite containing alkaline materials, as the detoxification of plant secondary compounds requires the production of organic acids that then must be buffered. Increased protein intake can itself provide bicarbonate for this purpose, which is used by some animals when eating plants with a high toxic load. In other words, there are plausible mechanisms predicting both an increase and a decrease in acidity, and so the net result on acid-base balance by the addition of plant sources of bicarbonate to a meat-only diet is actually unknown at this time. As exemplified by the acid buffering considerations, calcium balance is complicated by biochemically motivated changes in absorption or excretion. Other examples are reviewed including that absorption is positively affected by vitamin D status, as well as whether or not you exercise, whereas excretion is enhanced by a simple lack of growth stimulus, as seen in astronauts, reduced estrogen levels, and high sodium intake. Nonetheless, given that calcium balance was negative in the Bellevue study, remember Stefansson and his partner, and that calcium intake from meat alone is low, it may be a nutrient of concern, particularly in variations of the diet with no dairy intake and no consumable bones, for example, from fish. So I do know people on a carnivore diet, they will eat the bones of fish and even bone of other animals as a means of getting some calcium. Now, some people on carnivore do include dairy, and that would mitigate this concern about getting adequate levels of calcium. But then there's others that say, no way, Jose, don't eat dairy. It has an antithesis effect on your health. I don't think that's universal for everyone. I think some people handle dairy just fine. Again, high-fat dairy, not this low-fat crap. It's not real food. But if you can get raw milk, for example, and other raw sources of cheese, that probably gives you enough calcium in your diet that you don't have to worry about this issue. But there are some that they can't have it because of autoimmune disease interaction. They don't include dairy. That's a big no-no for a lot of people with autoimmune conditions. And so if you can handle high-fat dairy, then you mitigate this calcium response. But if you can't, she's saying that it's probably not as big a deal, but if you can try to eat fish bones, bone broth would also have this. If you take bones from good animals and then make a broth out of it, you would get some of the calcium that way as well. But she said traditionally Mongolians and Bedouins make extensive use of dairy. The Inuit ate small bones, reportedly chewed bones as well. These animal sources of calcium may not be present in the modern carnivore diet. Yeah, you tell people to start chewing on a bone, and they got this image of a dog chewing on a bone. But that's why your dog probably likes chewing bones. There's the marrow in there and some other kind of nutrients. That's what they're desiring, plus the chewing itself. Other clinical studies in which no nutrient deficiencies were observed include case reports from the International Center for Medical Nutritional Intervention, in which autoimmune patients are treated with low to no plant diets, for example. These studies differ from the previous in that the individuals already present with substantial disease and may therefore have more acute nutritional needs. Organ meat consumption for nutritional adequacy is emphasized. And I think that's a take home as well. If you're already dealing with some kind of disease progression, you probably need organ meats, and organ meats are loaded with all kinds of nutrients. Now, the American palate is kind of like grossed out by things like liver and heart and brain, beef tongue. All of these things have tons of nutrients in them, and they just neglect them. They don't have them at all. And so that's where a lot of the deficiencies come into play as well. So Amber writes, in conclusion, every essential nutrient can be found in animal source foods, but not always in high levels in the most commonly eaten ones. Some nutrients are rarer than others and may require planning if the goal is to guarantee meeting established recommended daily allowances. Because of systematic differences in metabolism and food matrix contexts, requirements on a carnivore diet may likewise differ just as systematically. Historical and clinical data suggest that all acute micronutrient needs can be met without plants, but long-term consequences are still unknown. Well, they're not doing the studies of long-term carnivore diets, which is, again, why Dr. Sean Baker and his team at MeatRx are conducting this kind of a study. They're trying to do this massive study, and it takes money to do a study like that. So they're already underway. Again, meatrx.com if you want to help contribute. Calcium levels in particular may be compromised over time, and that also merits further study, especially in order to disentangle the effects of acidity, bone growth stimulation, and interacting nutrients. I wonder if those people who are concerned about the calcium content of a carnivore diet, and they're unwilling to eat bones, if a targeted strategic amount of dairy of some sort, like the least offensive kind of dairy of some sort, would give them that adequacy in the calcium. Because that seems to be the one that they're kind of concerned about. It's just unknown about it. I wonder if you could get something that would give you all the benefits and all the calcium that you need from a specifically targeted amount of calcium in this dairy. And then that's all you eat. You don't eat more than that. You just eat just enough to get that adequacy. But fascinating paper, huh? So again, this was written by Amber O'Hearn. Can a carnivore diet provide all essential nutrients? It was published just this week in the Current Opinions, Endocrinology, Diabetes, and Obesity Journal. So go check it out. I thought it was worthy of doing an entire Jimmy Rants here today. So thank you for listening. And what do you think about this? Can you get all the essential nutrients you need from the carnivore diet? Has this been something that you've been concerned about? Maybe you started eating more animal foods and people are like, well, where are you going to get your, and just fill in the blank. And so now hopefully you realize maybe the needs are different and maybe you get all the nutrients you need from carnivore. All right, let's start here over on Instagram, then over to Facebook, finally over to YouTube. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. See what you guys have to say. Keto Court said, I'm excited to hear this one. Well, I hope it lived up to your expectations. 3 Free Mind says, I want to try carnivore, a little scared because of past heart history. Well, there's nothing unhealthy for your heart about eating a carnivore diet. So I'm not sure what your concerns are specifically. If it's the saturated fat thing, yeah, it's time to get over that because saturated fat is not the enemy in your health. In fact, I wrote a book about it called Cholesterol Clarity. If you're worried about saturated fat, raising your cholesterol, give you heart health, blah, blah, blah. It's anything that would inflame the body, which is carbohydrates and seed oils, vegetable oils. You get those 2 things out of your diet and you de-stress and you do all the things. A carnivore diet would be a perfect way to eat. Brittany says, I definitely respect the carnivore diet. It's so fascinating, but your girl just loves her vegetables. Yeah, and there's people just like you, Brittany, that love their vegetables. She did add that fruits and vegetables also have anti-nutrients. They do. And it's these anti-nutrients that aren't talked about in the plant matter that I think need to be talked about more. Just like what Amber was talking about when those people eat grains in order to get the fiber, they don't realize they're having to use a lot of nutrients to deal with all that fiber. So they get the fiber, but at what cost? They have to compensate it by having extra amounts of those nutrients. So you're right, there are lots of anti-nutrients in plant matter. Keto Court says oysters, egg yolks, liver, and plenty of beef should be the new eat the rainbow for nutrition. I like that idea. Somebody needs to make a graphic with that and have like all those foods and eat the rainbow. I like that. Temple says meat equals complete nutrition. Absolutely. Absolutely. I was just thinking about these two dudes. Yeah, the explorers, these Arctic explorers, like they know, they put themselves in that situation. And what's funny is even after the year-long study, they were still doubted. They were locked up in a metabolic ward willingly for a whole year, and then people still doubted what they had to say and what their bodies, the data didn't speak for itself. You know, we think doubting science just started happening in the last like 20, 30 years. Doubting science has happened for well over a century or more. Do you remember when this study with the guys that were in the metabolic ward was done? Yeah, it was in the 1920s. Let's see. She said the year that they were away, and in there, 1928, they agreed to participate in that study. So 1928 was when that happened, almost 100 years ago. And here we are, 92 years later, still dealing with skeptics. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Instagram. I'm going to pop over here now to my Facebook page, see what you guys have to say. What's up, Facebook? See what you got happening over here. Going to start carnivore for a month. Just to start, I'm almost there. Besides a salad here and there, says Christine. Yeah. A lot of people, they eat those things just out of kind of guilt. They're like, wow, it can't possibly be healthy to just eat meat. And so they feel like they have to add in a little something here and there. Now, if you want to have that every once in a while, I don't think it's a big deal. But to be neurotic about it, oh my gosh, I got to make sure I get some plant matter. No, you don't. You just don't. Truth about the thyroid, while I have an autoimmune disease, Graves' disease, hypothyroidism, doing strict keto has made it possible to reduce my medication to a very minuscule amount. Almost all symptoms under control. Endocrinologist said, keep doing what you're doing. Labs are in good shape. And the problem, Christine, congratulations, by the way, but the problem is your doctor doesn't want to know you did a ketogenic diet. They don't. Because if you told them that, they would be incredulous. So that's, we live in a weird society that way. Tracy says carnivore has helped me heal my IBS and GERD. It has also raised iron levels, a big thing. A lot of people are anemic because they have low iron. And there's no better source of iron than red meat. Go eat you some red meat. I was borderline anemic. I have no issues with vitamin deficiency whatsoever. Norma says, I started carnivore in March, 90% meat. Other than some new joint pain, I feel great. My labs have all been the best they've been. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, let's thank you, Facebook. Let's see what YouTube has to say now. What's up, YouTube? Love my carnivore diet. I must have gotten rid of my scurvy and constipation 9 months ago. Wow, that's cool. RJB, don't forget to consider genetics on this. For example, I have a SNP that does not let me convert beta carotene to vitamin A. Well, see, that's where getting down to the nitty-gritty of specificity to your condition is so important. Amber mentioned this. We don't need to be having these like across-the-board recommendations for everyone. It's why I said in the midst of this Jimmy Rants that we need to have customized kind of programs for each individual, and I think that day's coming soon. I think I have migrated more and more to a meat-heavy keto. Still love vegetables, but the quantities are much less. Love a juicy, medium rare ribeye steak. Yeah, you and me both, dude. You can't beat a ribeye. All right, Joshua says, wow, plant-based people have been pushing their agenda hard. They have, and they don't want you to know about anti-nutrients. They don't want you to know about that some of the properties in the things that they promote actually are sucking nutrients out of your body. It's an inconvenient fact for them that's exactly what they do, and meat does not do that. Animal foods. Christine says you're correct. She said incorporate a lot of plant-based foods in my diet. Oh, the one that got better, and yeah, I'm not surprised that doctors do that. So good news, if you eat a carnivore diet, you're doing just fine when it comes to your essential nutrients. And if you want to up your game, maybe you're one of those people who you've eaten hamburger patties for years, and that's basically your sole source of nutrition, or you've had steak, like the typical steaks that you can buy in the stores. Why don't you up your game a little bit? Why don't you try to add in a little bit of the organ meats? Start off with something not so bad, not so seemingly bad, and or mix it in. I know that everybody talks about like getting enough liver, and then like grinding it into ground beef, and then you don't taste it. You do still taste it, but it's not as profound. That kind of thing, and explore. Like there's all kinds of bits and parts. Now, try to find a local farmer or someone who raises an animal well, because you don't want to get a liver of a cow from a conventional cow. You want liver from a grass-fed animal, because it's going to be a much higher quality, for example. Or beef heart is really amazing. Beef tongue is cool. Just try the gamut, because we haven't been taught as Americans that we get nutrients from these animal parts that nobody eats. Most of these animal parts, you guys, they either end up in hot dogs or they end up being discarded. And so don't let that good quality food die in vain. That's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website, and as always, you can engage live in the content. You got to go follow me right here. I am on Instagram. I'm at Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live. We are here Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thank you for being here today, you guys. We also simulcast over here on my Facebook page, where Christine says, I actually love liver. I haven't tried any other organs. You're one of the strange people that loves livers. Most people look at it's all slimy and but good for you that you like liver. But thank you, Facebook, for being here. We also simulcast over on my YouTube channel. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live, you can watch it on replay on IGTV. So go check it out. We're going to put that up there right as soon as this is over. We're also going to throw it up over on YouTube within the next hour or so. It'll get up there. Just type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants. You will find the show. And just reminding you, today you have a bonus episode over on YouTube. Rob Frankfurt. He is an entrepreneurial investor who is trying to help some of these companies that make little devices. One of his, the BioSense meter, the little ketone meter, is one of his investments, as is the Oura Ring, a bunch of different ones out there. So go listen to what he has to say. He's on the Real Talk podcast today. It's up on YouTube now, and you can listen to it on the podcast a little bit later at LLDLC.com. And then finally, the official website for this show, JimmyRants.com. While you're there, see all the past episodes. And if you like what I do, I bring you some exclusive kind of information, and I try to be entertaining on this as well. So if you like this show, please consider supporting it. I love doing it, but it may go away if I can't get enough people that would support it. So I really need your support. Check it out. Patreon link over at JimmyRants.com. There's also a PayPal link. So if you like what I do, please show your support. All right, guys, that's it for now. We'll be back again real soon. Bye.